Sometimes life breaks a man so completely that even his own family stops believing in him. Raymond Hale knew that feeling all too well, a widower facing eviction while his children watched him crumble and his in-laws whispered about his failures. Then came a letter about inheriting a mansion. His family called it his trip to the funeral home. They begged him not to go, but Raymond had nothing left to lose. Inside that crumbling house, he found something nobody expected. Hidden behind walls were secrets worth $133 million. But the money came with a strange condition that would change his life forever. What was so important that someone hid a fortune for decades, waiting for the right person to find it? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Raymond Hale sat in his cramped studio apartment, staring at the eviction notice that had been taped to his door 3 days ago. The paper felt heavy in his weathered hand, heavier than it should have been for something so thin. Around him, cardboard boxes held the remnants of what had once been a full life. Martha's books, the children's school photos, wedding china that hadn't seen a table in 2 years. The apartment smelled of instant coffee and defeat. Outside, the March rain drummed against windows that hadn't been properly cleaned since he'd moved in after the foreclosure. This place was supposed to be temporary, just until he got back on his feet. That was 18 months ago. Martha's wedding ring sat on the small table beside him, catching what little light filtered through the grimy glass. He'd stopped wearing it 6 months after the funeral, not because the grief had lessened, but because his fingers had grown thin from too many meals of crackers and canned soup. The ring had become loose, threatening to slip off during his job interviews, the ones that used to come regularly, before word got around that Raymond Hale was the kind of man who fell apart when life got hard. He picked up the ring now, feeling its familiar weight. 28 years of marriage reduced to a simple gold band. Martha would have known what to do about the eviction notice. She always knew what to do. "Dad?" The voice came from his phone, tinny through the cheap speaker. He'd forgotten his daughter Sarah was still on the line. "I'm here, sweetheart. Did you hear what I said about Mum's medical bills?" The collection agency called again. Raymond closed his eyes. Even in death, Martha's illness continued to drain what little he had left. The experimental treatments that hadn't worked, the specialist visits that had offered hope without results, the medications that had cost more than his monthly salary of it, still demanded payment from a man who could barely afford his next meal. "I heard you, Sarah. I'm working on it." "Dad, you've been saying that for months. Michael and I have been talking." "Don't." The word came out sharper than he intended. "Don't you and your brother start making plans for me like I'm some helpless old man." The silence on the other end told him everything. That's exactly what they thought he was. Sarah's voice, when it came back, carried the patient tone she might use with a child. "We're worried about you. This isn't what Mom would have wanted." Martha. Always Martha. As if invoking her name would somehow fix the fact that Raymond had managed to lose everything she'd worked so hard to build. The house they'd bought when Sarah was born. The savings account they'd fed faithfully for 30 years. The life insurance policy that had been consumed by final medical bills and funeral costs. "Your mother would have wanted me to keep trying," he said. "But you're not trying, Dad. You're just existing." The words hit like a physical blow because they were true. Since Martha's death, Raymond had been going through the motions of living without actually engaging with life. Job interviews where he sat like a ghost of his former self. Conversations with his children that felt scripted and hollow. Days that blended into weeks that meant nothing. "I got a letter today," he said, partly to change the subject, partly because the manila envelope on his kitchen counter had been nagging at his consciousness all afternoon. "From who?" "Some law firm in Massachusetts. About your great-aunt Cordelia." Sarah made a small sound of confusion. "Great-aunt who?" "Your mother's side. Cordelia Wickham. I barely remember meeting her at our wedding. She must have been in her 70s then." Raymond walked to the kitchen counter and picked up the envelope. The return address was embossed in elegant script. Hartwell, Morrison, Associates, Attorneys at Law. "She died last month. Apparently, she left me something." Left you what? Raymond tore open the envelope he'd been too afraid to touch earlier. Inside was a formal letter on heavy cream paper, the kind that whispered of old money and serious business. He read it aloud. Dear Mr. Hale, we regret to inform you of the passing of Mrs. Cordelia Elizabeth Wickham on February 14th of this year. As per her last will and testament, you have been named as the sole beneficiary of her estate, specifically the property known as Wickham Manor, located at 1847 Thornbury Lane, Millbrook, Massachusetts. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience to arrange transfer of ownership and discuss the terms of inheritance. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Dad, that's wonderful. A house? Maybe you could sell it, pay off the debts. There's more. Raymond's eyes had found the second paragraph. It says here that the property comes with certain conditions that must be met within 90 days of inheritance, and that these conditions are explained in a sealed envelope that will be provided upon my arrival at the property. He set the letter down. It also mentions that the house has been vacant for 15 years. 15 years, Dad? What kind of shape could it be in? Raymond thought about that. A house left empty for 15 years in New England weather would be lucky to have a roof that didn't leak. The heating system would be shot, plumbing frozen and burst, windows broken by storms or vandals. It would be a money pit, not a salvation. But then again, what did he have to lose? His phone buzzed with an incoming call. He glanced at the screen and felt his stomach tighten. Margaret, his mother-in-law. Martha's mother had never thought Raymond was good enough for her daughter, and the past 2 years had only confirmed her worst opinions. I have to take this, he told Sarah. Dad, don't let Grandma Margaret. He switched calls. Hello, Margaret. Raymond. Her voice carried its usual mixture of disappointment and barely controlled irritation. I just spoke with Sarah about your latest crisis, an eviction notice. Really? It's temporary. I'm handling it. Like you handled Martha's medical bills, like you handled keeping your job, like you handled everything else that's fallen apart since my daughter died. Each word was designed to cut, and Margaret wielded them with surgical precision. She'd never forgiven him for not being able to afford the experimental treatment in Switzerland, the one that might have given Martha 6 more months. Never mind that it would have cost more than Raymond made in 5 years. Never mind that Martha herself had refused to let him mortgage their future for a slim chance at extending her present. I called, Margaret continued, because I wanted to discuss Sarah and Michael's suggestion. There's a very nice assisted living facility here in Phoenix. Clean, affordable, with people your age. The children think it might be time. The children think I should be put out to pasture. The children think you need help. There's no shame in admitting you can't cope anymore, Raymond. Martha's gone. You've lost the house, the job, apparently soon the apartment. What's left to fight for? The question hung in the air like smoke. What was left to fight for? His dignity, maybe, though that felt like a luxury he could no longer afford. His children's respect, though that seemed to have died with Martha. The possibility that he might still have something to offer the world, though the evidence suggested otherwise. I might be coming into some property, he said. An inheritance. Margaret's laugh was sharp and humorless. From whom? Your side of the family never had 2 pennies to rub together. Martha's great-aunt, Cordelia Wickham. The silence that followed was different from Sarah's confused pause. This silence had weight to it, history. Cordelia Wickham is dead? Margaret's voice had changed, lost some of its cutting edge. You knew her? I knew of her. Martha mentioned her a few times over the years. Said she was the black sheep of the family, lived alone in some crumbling mansion up north. There were always stories. Margaret stopped herself. What kind of inheritance? A house. Wickham Manor, in Massachusetts. Another pause. When Margaret spoke again, her voice carried something Raymond had never heard from her before. Genuine concern. Raymond, listen to me carefully. I don't know what kind of shape that place is in, but the stories Martha used to tell, that house has been falling down for decades. Cordelia was eccentric, maybe worse than eccentric. The family lost touch with her years ago because she became so strange. If she left you that house, it's not a gift. It's a burden. Maybe, but it's something. It's a trap. A crumbling mansion in the middle of nowhere. Do you have any idea what it costs to maintain a property like that? The taxes alone would bankrupt you before you could even think about repairs. And that's assuming the place isn't condemned already. Raymond looked around his studio apartment, at the eviction notice on the table, at Martha's ring catching the pale afternoon light. A trap? Maybe. But sometimes a trap was just another word for an opportunity that came with risks. The lawyer's letter mentioned conditions, he said. I won't know what they are until I go see the place. Then don't go, don't you see? This is exactly the kind of wild fantasy that's been keeping you from dealing with reality. There's no magical inheritance that's going to solve your problems. There's no fairy tale ending where the down-on-his-luck widower discovers he's secretly rich. There's just you getting older, getting poorer, and running out of chances to make sensible decisions. Margaret's words stung because they echoed his own inner voice, the one that whispered about failure and false hope during the long nights when sleep wouldn't come. But beneath the sting was something else, anger. Clean, focused anger at being written off by people who were supposed to care about him. You know what, Margaret? Maybe you're right. Maybe it is a fool's errand, but I'd rather be a fool who tried than a wise man who gave up. That stubborn pride is what got you into this mess in the first place. No, Raymond said, surprised by the steadiness in his own voice. What got me into this mess was my wife dying of cancer and me trying to pay for treatments that didn't work with money I didn't have. What got me into this mess was loving someone so much that I couldn't think straight when I lost her. If that's pride, then I'm guilty as charged. He ended the call before Margaret could respond, his heart hammering in his chest. In the silence that followed, he realized something had shifted inside him. For the first time in 2 years, he'd defended himself instead of accepting the judgment of others. The letter from the law firm lay open on his counter, formal and mysterious. Wickham Manor. Even the name suggested something grand and gothic, the kind of place where family secrets gathered dust in forgotten rooms. Maybe Margaret was right about it being a trap. Maybe his children were right about him needing help. But maybe, just maybe, this was the chance he'd been waiting for without knowing it. Not a chance to get rich, he wasn't naive enough to believe in fairy tale endings, but a chance to prove to himself and his family that Raymond Hale wasn't finished yet. He picked up Martha's ring again, feeling its weight. If he went to Massachusetts, he'd be taking her with him in the only way that mattered. And if the house turned out to be the disaster everyone predicted, at least he'd have tried something other than slowly disappearing in a studio apartment that smelled like defeat. Outside, the March rain continued to fall, washing the city clean for spring. Raymond made his decision the way Martha had taught him, to make all important decisions, with his heart leading and his head following close behind. Tomorrow, he would call the law firm and arrange to see his inheritance. Tonight, he would pack the few things that mattered and prepare for a journey that might change everything or might change nothing at all. Either way, it would be his choice to make. The drive to Massachusetts took Raymond through landscapes that seemed to mirror his own transformation. The urban sprawl of his failed life gradually gave way to small towns with white-steepled churches and main streets that whispered of older, simpler times. His ancient Honda wheezed up hills that would have been nothing to the reliable sedan he'd owned before Martha's illness, but the old car was determined, like its owner. Millbrook appeared around a bend, like something from a New England postcard. Postcards included buildings that had seen better decades. The town square centered around a weathered statue of some forgotten Civil War hero, surrounded by shops that looked like they'd been holding their breath since 1970. A hardware store with a hand-painted sign. A diner called May's with gingham curtains in the windows. A barber shop with the traditional red and white pole that might have been spinning since Eisenhower was president. Raymond pulled into May's parking lot, his GPS having lost signal 3 miles back. The gravel crunched under his feet as he approached the diner, noting how the screen door hung slightly crooked on its hinges. Inside, the smell of coffee and bacon grease created an atmosphere of permanent breakfast, and the waitressa woman in her 60s with kind eyes and sensible shoes looked up from wiping down the counter. "You lost, honey?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "Looking for Thornbury Lane, number 1847. The diner went quiet. Raymond became aware that the three other customers, two men in work clothes and an elderly woman with a crossword puzzle had, all turned to look at him. The waitress set down her cleaning rag with the deliberate care of someone buying time to think. "You'd be Raymond Hale," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am. How did you—" "Small town, honey. Word gets around, especially when it concerns the Wickham place." She studied his face with the frankness of someone who'd spent decades reading people over coffee and pie. "You sure you want to go out there?" "I'm sure I need to." The waitress nodded as if this distinction mattered. "Thornbury Lane's about 2 miles north of here. Take the main road out of town, turn right at the old covered bridge. You can't miss it. It's the only covered bridge we got. Lane's on your left, but there's no sign anymore. Look for the stone pillars with the iron gates." One of the men at the counter, a fellow with greying temples and hands that spoke of honest work, turned on his stool. "Mister, I don't mean to pry, but that place has been empty for 15 years. Might not be safe for someone to stay there alone. I appreciate the concern." Cordelia was a good woman, the waitress added quickly, shooting the man a look that suggested this was a conversation they'd had before. "Eccentric maybe, but good-hearted. It's just that the house, well, it's been through some hard times." Raymond thanked them and ordered coffee for the road, noting how they watched him with the mixture of concern and curiosity that small towns reserved for outsiders walking into obvious trouble. The coffee was strong and honest, the kind Martha used to make on Saturday mornings when they had nowhere to be and all day to get there. The covered bridge was indeed impossible to miss, its weathered wood spanning a creek that chuckled over smooth stones. Beyond it, the road narrowed and the forest grew thicker, as if the modern world was gradually being filtered out. When the stone pillars appeared, Raymond's first thought was that they looked like sentries standing guard over secrets. The iron gates hung open, their hinges green with age and disuse. A chain that might once have secured them lay rusted in the tall grass. Beyond the gates, a drive disappeared into shadows cast by oak trees that had been old when his grandparents were young. Raymond drove slowly up the winding lane, his Honda's engine echoing strangely in the cathedral quiet of the ancient trees. The drive was longer than he'd expected, curving through what had once been carefully planned landscaping, but now resembled a battle between cultivation and wild nature. Rhododendron bushes had grown into small forests. Ivy covered what might have been decorative walls or garden structures, turning them into green mysteries. Then the trees parted, and Wickham Manor rose before him like something from a Gothic novel. His first thought was that the house was impossibly large. His second thought was that it was impossibly damaged. 3 stories of dark stone and timber rose against the grey March sky, with towers and gables that spoke of Victorian ambition and unlimited budgets. But time and weather had been harsh teachers. Windows were boarded up or broken. Sections of the roof sagged ominously. Ivy covered much of the structure, giving it the appearance of a building being slowly digested by the forest. Yet underneath the decay, Raymond could see the bones of something magnificent. The proportions were perfect, the craftsmanship evident even through years of neglect. This had been someone's dream house, their attempt to create something beautiful and lasting. The fact that it had failed made it more tragic, not less impressive. He parked in what had once been a circular drive, now more weeds than gravel, and sat for a moment staring up at his inheritance. Margaret's voice echoed in his memory. "It's not a gift, it's a burden." Maybe she was right. Maybe he was looking at the physical manifestation of his own life, something that had once held promise, but now stood as a monument to decay and lost hope. But there was something else, something that made him get out of the car despite his doubts. The house felt like it was waiting. Not malevolently, but patiently, the way Martha used to wait for him to work through his problems and reach the conclusions she'd already seen coming. The front door was massive, made of dark wood, that had weathered to the color of old pewter. A brass knocker in the shape of a lion's head hung at eye level, green with verdigris but still dignified. To the right of the door, a small brass plaque read, "Wickham Manor built 1887, restored with love." Raymond tried the door and found it locked, which was probably for the best given the condition of the building. He walked around the structure, noting broken shutters, damaged stonework, and gutters hanging at dangerous angles. The back of the house faced what had once been formal gardens, but now resembled a meadow, punctuated by the skeletal remains of rose arbors and fountain bases. It was while circling back toward the front that he spotted the law office car parked beside his Honda. A man in his 50s, wearing a wool coat that looked expensive even to Raymond's untrained eye, stood waiting by the front steps. "Mr. Hale, I'm James Hartwell, from the law firm." The attorney's handshake was firm, and his smile genuine. "I apologize for the ambush, but I wanted to be here when you first saw the property. How people react to Wickham Manor tells me a lot about whether they're likely to succeed with the inheritance. And how am I doing so far? Better than most." The last 3 potential heirs took one look and drove away. Hartwell produced a large brass key from his coat pocket. "Shall we go inside? I have Mrs. Wickham's letter for you, and there are things you need to understand about the terms of the inheritance." The key turned smoothly in the ancient lock, suggesting that someone had been maintaining at least the basic mechanisms. The front door opened into a foyer that took Raymond's breath away despite the dust and decay. The ceiling soared 20 feet above, supported by hand-carved beams that belonged in a cathedral. A grand staircase curved upward to a second-floor gallery, its banister carved with vines and flowers that seemed to move in the shifting light from broken windows. "Impressive, isn't it?" Hartwell said, his voice echoing in the vast space. "Even in this condition, you can see what it must have been like in its prime." Dust motes danced in shafts of sunlight that streamed through gaps in the boarded windows, creating an almost sacred atmosphere. The floors were wide plank hardwood, scarred and stained but solid beneath their feet. Doorways led off in multiple directions, promising rooms full of mysteries and memories. "Mrs. Wickham lived here alone for 40 years, Hartwell continued, leading Raymond into what had once been a sitting room. "She was quite elderly when she passed, but she maintained the essential systems right up until the end. The house has good bones, structurally sound despite appearances." They walked through rooms that spoke of faded grandeur, a library with floor-to-ceiling shelves, most still filled with leather-bound volumes, a dining room dominated by a table that could seat 20, a kitchen that belonged in a restaurant but hadn't seen use in years. Each room told stories of a life lived alone but not lonely, of someone who had chosen solitude but surrounded herself with beautiful things. "Now," Hartwell said, stopping in what had been the Manor's morning room, "let me explain the terms of your inheritance." He produced an envelope from his briefcase, cream-colored and sealed with red wax. Mrs. Wickham was very specific about how this should be handled. Raymond took the envelope, noting that his name was written across the front in an elegant, old-fashioned hand. The wax seal bore the impression of the same lion's head that adorned the front door knocker. "Before you open that," Hartwell said, "I need to explain the legal framework. You have 90 days from today to meet certain conditions that Mrs. Wickham has outlined in her letter. If you succeed, the house and all its contents become yours, free and clear. If you fail, or if you choose not to attempt the conditions, the property reverts to the Historical Society and will likely be demolished." Demolished? The maintenance costs are prohibitive for a non-profit organization. The most practical solution would be to tear it down and sell the land for development. Hartwell's expression was apologetic but matter-of-fact. Mrs. Wickham was aware of this. She designed the inheritance specifically to find someone who would save the house, not just own it. Raymond broke the wax seal and unfolded the letter inside. The paper was heavy, expensive, and the handwriting was the same elegant script as his name on the envelope. "My dear Raymond," the letter began, "if you are reading this, then I have passed away and you have chosen to come see what your eccentric great-aunt-in-law has left you. I hope you are not too dismayed by the condition of my beloved home. It has seen better days, as have we all, but it still holds wonders for those willing to look beneath the surface. Raymond continued reading, his amazement growing with each paragraph. Cordelia's letter revealed not just the conditions of inheritance, but the reason she had chosen him specifically. She had been following his life from a distance, had known about Martha's illness, about his financial struggles, about his children's loss of faith in him. "You may wonder why I have chosen you for this task," the letter continued, "when we barely knew each other in life. The answer is simple. You are the only person in our extended family who has shown the capacity for both great love and great sacrifice. Martha told me about the experimental treatments you mortgaged your future to attempt. She told me about the nights you sat by her bedside when you should have been working. She told me about a man who would give everything for the people he loved, even when it meant losing everything for himself." The letter went on to explain the conditions. Raymond must spend 90 consecutive days living in Wickham Manor, during which time he must discover the house's true purpose and prove himself worthy of the inheritance by demonstrating the same qualities that had made him a good husband and father. "The house will test you," Cordelia's letter warned, "not with ghosts or supernatural nonsense, but with the very real challenges of loneliness, doubt, and the temptation to give up when things seem impossible. If you can face these challenges and still choose to fight for something beautiful, then you will understand why I have entrusted you with my life's work." The letter concluded with a cryptic reference to other documents hidden throughout the house, clues that would reveal the full nature of Cordelia's bequest if Raymond proved worthy of finding them. "Well?" Hartwell asked when Raymond finished reading. "What do you think?" Raymond looked around the morning room, with its tall windows that would frame sunrise beautifully if they weren't boarded up, its elegant moldings that spoke of craftsmen who took pride in their work, its air of faded hope waiting for renewal. "I think," he said slowly, "that I've been looking for a reason to keep fighting, and maybe I just found one." Hartwell smiled and produced a second key, smaller than the first. "Then welcome to Wickham Manor, Mr. Hale. This key opens the caretaker's apartment in the East Wing. Mrs. Wickham had it prepared specifically for the heir who would accept her challenge. It's modest but comfortable, and more importantly, it's safe and warm." As they walked toward the East Wing, Raymond felt something shift inside his chest, a loosening of the tight knot of despair that had lived there since Martha's death. This house was broken, just like him. But broken things could be mended if someone cared enough to try. For the first time in 2 years, Raymond Hale had a purpose that extended beyond simply surviving until tomorrow. The caretaker's apartment proved to be a sanctuary within the larger chaos of Wickham Manor. Cordelia had indeed prepared it carefully. 2 rooms and a kitchenette that, while dated, were clean and functional. The furniture was simple but well made, the kind of pieces that were built to last rather than impress. Most importantly, the heating worked, the plumbing functioned, and the windows weren't boarded up, allowing natural light to flood the small space. Raymond spent his first night alternating between exhaustion and amazement. Every creak and groan of the old house spoke of its age and abandonment, but also of its stubborn refusal to surrender completely to time. He'd found basic supplies in the kitchenette, canned goods, coffee, even a bottle of wine with a note from Cordelia. "For the end of your first day, when you realize what you've gotten yourself into." By morning, armed with the wine-aided courage of someone who had nothing left to lose, Raymond began his systematic exploration of his inheritance. Cordelia's letter had mentioned hidden documents throughout the house, but she hadn't provided a map. The search would require him to examine every room, every nook, every possibility within the manor's vast footprint. He started with the library, reasoning that important documents would most likely be hidden among books. The room was magnificent, even in decay floor-to-ceiling shelves, lined 3 walls, with a 4th wall dominated by a massive stone fireplace. Most of the books remained, protected by their leather bindings from the worst of time's ravages. Many were first editions, some dating back to the late 1800s when the house was built. It was while examining a shelf of financial texts that Raymond discovered the first clue. Behind a thick volume on railroad investments, wedged into a gap between the book and the shelf back, was a slim, leather-bound ledger. Unlike the other books, this one showed signs of regular use. The leather was worn smooth by handling, and bookmarks made of fabric ribbon marked several pages. The ledger was filled with entries in Cordelia's handwriting, but they weren't typical household accounts. Instead, they were records of charitable donations, each entry meticulously detailed. March 15, 1987, Mrs. Patterson, electric bill, 127.43. April 2, 1987, Tommy Rodriguez, school supplies, 89.2. April 18, 1987, Miller family, groceries, 234.17. Page after page documented a pattern of quiet generosity spanning decades. Cordelia had been secretly helping families in Millbrook and the surrounding communities, paying utility bills, buying groceries, covering medical expenses, funding children's school supplies and activities. The amounts were never huge, clearly designed to help without creating dependence, but they were consistent and thoughtful. Raymond calculated quickly. Over 40 years, the donations in this ledger alone totaled hundreds of thousands of dollars. This wasn't casual charity. It was a systematic effort to support an entire community without seeking recognition or credit. But the most intriguing entries were the most recent ones, from just before Cordelia's death. January 10, 2024, R. Hale Research, 2-500. January 24, 2024, R. Hale Family Investigation, 1-800. February 1, 2024, Legal Preparation R. Hale Inheritance, 5-200. Raymond stared at these entries, his coffee growing cold in his hands. Cordelia had spent money researching him, investigating his family, preparing for his inheritance. The inheritance hadn't been a spontaneous decision or a random selection from distant relatives. She had chosen him deliberately after careful study. His phone rang, jarring him from his thoughts. Sarah's name appeared on the screen. "Dad, how are you settling in?" "It's remarkable, sweetheart. This place is huge, bigger than anything I could have imagined. But is it livable? Do you have heat and water?" "I do. There's a small apartment that's been maintained separately from the main house." "Your great-aunt was very thorough in her planning." Raymond walked to the window, looking out over the overgrown gardens. "Sarah, did your mother ever mention Cordelia to you? Beyond just mentioning that she existed?" "Not really. Why?" "I'm finding evidence that she knew more about our family than we realized. She was following my life, maybe for years." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Dad, that's kind of creepy, isn't it?" "Maybe. Or maybe it's the most beautiful thing anyone's ever done for us." Raymond told her about the charitable ledger, about the years of quiet generosity to strangers. This woman spent her life helping people who didn't even know her name, and somehow she decided I was worth helping too. "What exactly are the conditions of the inheritance? You mentioned 90 days. Raymond explained Cordelia's challenge as he understood it, spending 3 months in the house, discovering its true purpose, proving himself worthy through some demonstration of character. It sounded vague even to him, but Sarah listened without interrupting. "Dad," she said when he finished, "what if this is some kind of test you can't pass? What if she set up impossible conditions? Then I'll have spent 3 months in a beautiful house, learning about a remarkable woman, instead of sitting in that apartment, waiting for the eviction sheriff." Raymond surprised himself with the conviction in his voice. "Either way, it's better than what I was doing." After the call, Raymond continued his exploration with renewed purpose. The ledger was clearly just the beginning. Cordelia's letter had promised multiple clues throughout the house. In the dining room, he found a hidden panel behind the china cabinet that revealed a safe, but he lacked the combination. In the morning room, a loose floorboard concealed a metal box filled with old photographs and newspaper clippings, But their significance wasn't immediately clear. It was in the master bedroom that Raymond made his next significant discovery. The room was exactly as Cordelia had left it, not preserved like a museum, but lived in until the end. Her reading glasses sat on the nightstand beside a half-finished crossword puzzle. A sweater was draped over the chair by the window, as if she'd just taken it off. But it was the desk in the corner that drew his attention. Unlike everything else in the room, the desk showed signs of recent activity. Papers were stacked neatly, pens arranged in a holder, a calendar open to February 2024, the month Cordelia died. The calendar was marked with appointments: Doctor 2:0, Lawyer 10:30, final preparations. But it was the notation on February 13th, the day before she died, that stopped Raymond cold. Hale arrives tomorrow. House ready. God willing, he'll understand. She had timed her death, not in a morbid way, but with the practical acceptance of someone who knew her time was limited and wanted to ensure everything was properly arranged. She had lived just long enough to see her plan set in motion, to know that Raymond would receive the inheritance and have the opportunity to save the house she loved. Among the papers on the desk, Raymond found what appeared to be rough drafts of her letter to him, multiple versions, each refined to strike exactly the right tone of challenge and encouragement. In the margins, she had written notes. Too harsh. Will he understand? Must convey urgency, without desperation. But the most revealing document was a folder marked R. Hale, Character Assessment. Inside were reports from a private investigator, chronicling Raymond's response to Martha's illness, his financial sacrifices, his devotion, even when the situation became hopeless. The investigator had interviewed neighbors, former co-workers, even tracked down nurses from the hospital where Martha had been treated. Every report painted the same picture: a man who had given everything for love, who had bankrupted himself trying to save his wife, who had never complained or blamed anyone for the unfairness of it all. The investigator's final summary was brief but powerful. Subject demonstrates exceptional character under extreme duress. Recommendation: ideal candidate for Mrs. Wickham's purposes. Raymond sat heavily in Cordelia's chair, overwhelmed by the scope of her planning and the depth of her faith in him. She had bet everything on a man she barely knew, based on reports from strangers who had observed him during the worst period of his life. The weight of that trust was almost unbearable. His phone buzzed with a text from Michael. Mom's anniversary is next month. Will you be back in time? The anniversary of Martha's death. Raymond had dreaded its approach, had been planning to spend it alone in his studio apartment, surrounded by boxes and memories. But now he realized he would spend it here, in this house that Martha's distant relative had entrusted to his care. The symmetry felt intentional, another aspect of Cordelia's careful planning. That evening, as Raymond prepared a simple dinner in the caretaker's kitchen, he found himself talking aloud to the empty house. It felt natural, not crazy the way he used to talk to Martha while cooking, sharing the day's thoughts and discoveries. I think I'm beginning to understand what you wanted, he said to Cordelia's spirit, if such things existed. This isn't just about saving a house. It's about proving that broken things can be repaired, that people written off by the world can still have value. Outside, the March wind howled through the ancient oaks, but inside the caretaker's apartment, Raymond felt warmer than he had in months. He had work to do, mysteries to solve, a trust to either earn or fulfill. For the first time since Martha's death, tomorrow felt like it might bring something other than mere survival. The Victorian ledger sat open on his small table, its pages filled with evidence of one woman's quiet revolution against despair. Raymond studied the entries, beginning to see patterns in Cordelia's giving, understanding that each donation had been carefully calculated not just for maximum impact, but for minimum visibility. She had been a secret guardian angel to her community, and now she was asking him to carry on that legacy. The question was whether a man who had lost everything could find the strength to give to others who had even less. Raymond woke on his third morning at Wickham Manor to the sound of metal scraping against stone. From his apartment window, he could see a man in work clothes examining the manor's foundation, making notes on a clipboard. The stranger looked official, the kind of person who carried authority in the set of his shoulders and the thoroughness of his inspection. By the time Raymond dressed and made his way outside, the man had moved to the front steps and was photographing damage to the stonework. He looked up as Raymond approached, his expression neutral but assessing. "You'd be the new owner," the man said. It wasn't a question. "Raymond Hale. And you are?" "Building inspector. Town sent me out to do a safety assessment." He gestured toward the manor with his pen. "Been getting some calls about this place, people concerned about structural integrity." Raymond felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. "What kind of calls?" "Anonymous tips. Someone saying the building's unsafe, might collapse, could be a danger to anyone staying here." The inspector's tone was professionally neutral, but his eyes were sympathetic. "Look, Mr. Hale, I've been doing this job for 20 years. This house has good bones, needs work sure, but it's not going anywhere. Someone's trying to make trouble for you." "Any idea who?" "Could be anybody. Sometimes when a property like this changes hands, people get nervous about what might happen to the neighborhood. Sometimes it's developers hoping to force a quick sale." The inspector tucked his clipboard under his arm. "My report's going to say the house is structurally sound, but needs cosmetic and weatherproofing work. Nothing that would require evacuation or condemnation." After the inspector left, Raymond felt the first real stirring of unease since arriving at the manor. Someone wanted him gone, wanted him to fail Cordelia's test. But who and why? The answer began to emerge when he made his second significant discovery of the week. Following a hunch based on the architectural details he'd observed, Raymond had been searching for hidden passages or concealed rooms features common in houses of the Victorian era. In the library, behind a section of shelving that moved on hidden hinges, he found what he was looking for. The concealed room was small but significant, clearly designed as a private office or study. Unlike the rest of the house, this space showed no signs of decay. The air was dry, the walls were sound, and most importantly, the room contained a treasure trove of documents that Cordelia had carefully preserved. At the center of it all was an ornate brass key, larger and more elaborate than the house keys Hartwell had given him. It hung on a silk ribbon tied to the handle of an antique desk, and attached to the ribbon was a note in Cordelia's handwriting, "For the doors that matter most." The desk itself was a masterpiece of craftsmanship, with dozens of small drawers and compartments, each fitted with tiny brass locks. But the key opened all of them, revealing a systematic archive of the Wickham family's true legacy. The documents told a story that transformed Raymond's understanding of his inheritance. The Wickham family had been wealthy, yes, but their wealth had come with a purpose. For 3 generations, they had used their fortune to create what amounted to a private social safety net for their community. They had paid for children's educations, supported struggling families through hard times, funded medical treatments for those who couldn't afford them, and quietly prevented foreclosures and evictions. But more than that, they had done it all in secret. No plaques bore their name, no buildings were named after them, no newspaper articles praised their generosity. They had given anonymously, through intermediaries, creating a network of quiet kindness that supported entire communities without ever revealing its source. Cordelia had been the last of the line, the final keeper of this family mission, and now she was asking Raymond to carry it forward. The financial documents were staggering. Hidden accounts, investment portfolios, trust funds all carefully managed and grown over decades. The total assets available for charitable giving exceeded anything Raymond had imagined possible. Cordelia hadn't just left him a house, she had left him the means to continue a century-long tradition of secret philanthropy. But there was a catch, and it was significant. The money could only be accessed by someone who proved themselves worthy through the same kind of sacrifice and dedication that had defined the Wickham legacy. The inheritance wasn't just about living in the house for 90 days. It was about demonstrating that he could put others' needs before his own comfort, that he could give generously, even when he had little to give. Raymond was still processing this revelation when his phone rang. Margaret's name on the screen made his stomach tighten, but he answered anyway. "Raymond, thank God you picked up. I've been trying to reach you for 2 days. I've been busy. What's wrong?" "What's wrong is that you've disappeared to some godforsaken mansion in the middle of nowhere, and your children are worried sick." Margaret's voice carried its usual edge of barely controlled frustration. "Sarah told me about these ridiculous conditions you have to meet. Do you have any idea how this sounds to people who care about you? It sounds like I'm finally doing something other than feeling sorry for myself. It sounds like you're having some kind of breakdown. Living alone in a house that's falling down, talking about secret tests and hidden purposes. Raymond, this is exactly the kind of fantasy thinking that's kept you from dealing with reality." Raymond looked around the hidden room, at the evidence of a family's century-long commitment to helping others, at the careful planning that had brought him to this moment. "Maybe my reality needed changing. Your reality is that you're a 62-year-old man with no job, no savings, and no home. Your reality is that you need help, not fairy tale adventures." "And what help are you offering, Margaret, besides telling me I'm too old and too broken to amount to anything?" The silence that followed was charged with 2 years of accumulated resentment. When Margaret spoke again, her voice was colder but more honest than usual. "I'm offering you the truth. Martha's gone, Raymond. She's not coming back. And staying in that house, surrounded by reminders of family connections and obligations, isn't going to bring her back or fix what's broken in your life." "You're right," Raymond said quietly. "Martha's not coming back. But maybe that's exactly why I need to be here." After ending the call, Raymond sat in Cordelia's hidden office, surrounded by documents that represented a lifetime of quiet service to others. Margaret's words stung because they contained elements of truth. He was old, he was broke, and Martha wasn't coming back. But they also revealed something about Margaret that he'd never fully understood before. She had given up on him completely. In her mind, he was already finished, already written off as a man whose best days were behind him. The realization was liberating in an unexpected way. If Margaret and others had already decided he was done, then he had nothing to lose by proving them wrong. And if he failed Cordelia's test, at least he would fail while trying to do something meaningful. That afternoon brought another visitor, but this one was welcome. A woman in her 70s knocked on the front door, carrying a casserole dish and wearing the kind of smile that suggested she'd been baking for neighbors since the Eisenhower administration. "You must be Raymond," she said when he opened the door. "I'm Helen Patterson. I live about a mile down the road." The name was familiar. Patterson had appeared frequently in Cordelia's charitable ledger. Helen's electricity bills, her granddaughter's school supplies, her husband's medical expenses during his final illness. Cordelia had been quietly supporting this woman for decades. "I wanted to welcome you to the neighborhood," Helen continued, "and to say thank you." "Thank you for what?" Helen's eyes grew misty. "For caring enough about Cordelia's memory to try to save this place. She was a saint, you know. Never married, never had children of her own, but she mothered half the county without anyone realizing it. Did you know about her helping people?" "Not for years. I thought I was just lucky bills that somehow got paid when I couldn't manage them. Surprise scholarships for my granddaughter, medical bills that disappeared mysteriously. It wasn't until near the end, when Cordelia got sick, that she told me the truth." Helen wiped her eyes with a handkerchief that looked as old as she was. She said someone needed to know, in case something happened to her before she could arrange for the work to continue. And now she's arranged for it to continue. "Has she? Are you planning to stay?" Raymond looked back at the manor, at its damaged facade, hiding rooms full of secrets and possibilities. "I'm planning to try." Helen smiled and pressed the casserole dish into his hands. "Then you'll need to keep your strength up. That's my grandmother's recipe for beef stew. It'll stick to your ribs during these cold March nights." That evening, as Raymond ate Helen's stew and studied Cordelia's documents by lamplight, He felt something he hadn't experienced in 2 years, a sense of belonging. Not to a place, exactly, but to a purpose. Cordelia had spent her life quietly making things better for people who didn't even know her name. She was asking him to carry on that tradition, to become part of something larger than his own grief and failure. The brass key lay on the desk beside him, warm from handling. Tomorrow, he would continue exploring the house, looking for the other doors it might open. Tonight, he would plan how to prove himself worthy of the trust an eccentric old woman had placed in a broken widower she'd never really known. Outside, the March wind continued to test the manor's ancient bones, but inside the hidden room, surrounded by evidence of quiet miracles, Raymond Hale began to believe that broken thingshouses, hearts, lives could indeed be made whole again. The architectural blueprints were hidden exactly where Raymond had begun to expect them, in the most logical yet overlooked place. Behind the framed portrait of the manor's original builder in the main hallway, Cordelia had concealed a leather tube containing the original construction plans from 1887. Raymond spread the blueprints across the dining room table, weighing down the corners with candlesticks to keep the aged paper flat. What he discovered changed everything he thought he knew about Wickham Manor. The house had been designed not just as a residence, but as a fortress of generosity. Hidden throughout the structure were passages, concealed rooms, and secret storage areas, all intended to facilitate the family's charitable work without drawing attention to it. The original architect had been commissioned to create a house that could serve as the headquarters for a private philanthropy network, complete with secure document storage, private meeting spaces, and discreet entrances for people who needed help but couldn't afford to be seen asking for it. The brass key from Cordelia's desk, unlocked more than drawsit, opened a series of panels throughout the house, revealing a complex system of hidden spaces. Behind the library's main bookshelf was a room where families could meet privately with Wickham representatives. Beneath the kitchen was a storage area where emergency supplies had been kept for distribution during hard times. Even the tower that dominated the manor's east wing had been designed with a purpose. Its windows provided clear sight lines to the main roads, allowing the family to watch for people who might need help but were too proud to ask directly. As Raymond explored these hidden spaces, he found evidence of their use spanning decades. In the secret meeting room, chairs were arranged around a simple table where life-changing conversations had taken place. Notes in the margins of old documents revealed the careful thought that went into each act of charity. Mrs. Henderson Pride issue, arrange anonymous scholarship. Murphy family father unemployed, arrange temporary work through intermediary. Emergency medical fund established with Dr. Williams, no questions asked. The Wickhams hadn't just given money, they had created an entire infrastructure of kindness, a shadow welfare system that operated through discretion and genuine care for their neighbors' dignity. But the blueprints also revealed something troubling. Several of the hidden passages showed signs of recent use, footprints in the dust, disturbed cobwebs, even fresh scratches on some of the door mechanisms. Someone else had been in these spaces, someone who knew about the house's secrets. Raymond's phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Dad, someone called asking questions about you and the house. Said they were from a historical society, but something felt off. Are you okay?" Before he could respond, another message came through, this one from Michael. "Got a weird call too. Guy asking about your inheritance. Wanted to know if you'd found anything significant yet. Didn't give his name." Raymond felt the first real chill of fear since arriving at the manor. Someone was actively investigating his presence here, trying to learn what he might have discovered. The anonymous building inspection complaints suddenly made more sense. Someone wanted him gone before he could fully understand what Cordelia had left him. That afternoon, while photographing the blueprints for safekeeping, Raymond heard a car approaching up the long drive. Through the front windows, he watched a black sedan park near the entrance. Two men got out tone in an expensive suit. The other dressed more casually, but moving with the alert posture of security or law enforcement. Raymond met them at the front door, the original brass key tucked safely in his pocket. Mr. Hale, I'm David Morrison, from Morrison Development Group. The man in the suit extended a business card that felt heavy and expensive. This is my associate, Mr. Turner. We were hoping to have a conversation with you about your inheritance. What kind of conversation? The kind that could be very profitable for you. Morrison's smile was practiced and confident. We represent investors who are very interested in this property. Beautiful location, significant acreage, tremendous potential for the right kind of development. The house isn't for sale. Everything's for sale, Mr. Hale. It's just a matter of finding the right price. Morrison gestured toward the Manor's damaged facade. Look, we understand you're trying to honor Mrs. Wickham's wishes, but let's be realistic. This place needs millions in repairs just to be habitable. The heating system alone is probably 50 years out of date. The electrical work would require complete rewiring. The roof needs to be entirely rebuilt. Turner, the quiet associate, spoke for the first time. We've done our research, Mr. Hale. You're not in a financial position to take on a project like this, but we are. My financial position is my own business. Of course, Morrison said smoothly. But consider this. We're prepared to offer you $5 million, cash, for the property as it stands. No inspections, no contingencies, closing within 30 days. You could walk away with enough money to live comfortably for the rest of your life, and we'd take care of all the headaches that come with a property like this. Raymond studied the two men, noting how Turner's eyes constantly moved, cataloging details, assessing vulnerabilities. Morrison was the salesman, but Turner was the enforcer. What would you do with the property? Luxury residential development. This area is perfectly positioned for high-end homes, maybe a golf course, definitely a marina on that creek that runs through the back of the property. We could create something really special here by tearing down the manor. Morrison's pause was brief but telling. The manor would be repurposed. Some of the stonework might be incorporated into the new construction as a historical accent. That's a polite way of saying you'd demolish it. Mr. Hale, with all due respect, you're one man trying to save a house that's been dying for 15 years. We're a development company with the resources to create something that would benefit the entire community. New jobs, increased tax revenue, property values that would lift the whole area. Raymond looked past the two men toward the ancient oaks that lined the drive, thinking about Cordelia's hidden rooms and secret passages, about the careful architecture of generosity that had operated from this house for over a century. I appreciate the offer, he said finally, but I'm not interested in selling. Morrison's smile never wavered, but something shifted behind his eyes. Think about it, Mr. Hale. $5 million is a lot of money. But opportunities like this don't stay open indefinitely. Markets change, interest shifts, investors find other projects. He handed Raymond another business card. Call me when you're ready to be reasonable. After they left, Raymond found himself pacing through the manor's rooms, agitated by the encounter. The offer was real. $5 million was more money than he'd ever imagined having. It would solve every financial problem he'd ever faced, would allow him to help his children, would give him security for the rest of his life. But it would also mean the end of everything Cordelia had worked to preserve. The manor would be torn down, its hidden rooms and secret passages destroyed, its century-long mission of quiet charity erased forever. The very infrastructure of kindness that the Wickham family had built would be bulldozed to make room for a golf course. That evening, Raymond called Sarah to warn her about Morrison's people, but the conversation took an unexpected turn. Dad, maybe you should consider their offer. Sarah. No, hear me out. $5 million, Dad. Think about what that could mean. You could buy a nice house, help Michael and me with our mortgages, maybe even start a college fund for your future grandchildren. You could be comfortable, secure, respected again. Respected? You know what I mean. People would see that you made a smart business decision, that you knew when to take a good deal, instead of, she paused, searching for diplomatic words. Instead of what? Instead of a stubborn old man trying to restore a house that's too far gone to save. The words hung in the air between them, honest and painful. Sarah wasn't being cruel. She was being practical, looking out for his welfare the way Margaret had trained her to do. But she was also revealing that she, like the others, had stopped believing in him. "What if the house isn't too far gone?" Raymond asked quietly. "What if it just needs someone who believes it's worth saving?" "Dad, I love your optimism, I really do. But this isn't about believing in fairy tales. This is about making smart choices with the time you have left." After the call ended, Raymond stood in the Manor's grand foyer, looking up at the carved ceiling that had been crafted by artisans who took pride in their work, who built things to last. Sarah was wrong about one thing. This wasn't about fairy tales or unrealistic optimism. This was about understanding that some things were worth preserving, even when preservation was difficult. The architectural blueprints lay spread across the dining room table, revealing the careful thought that had gone into creating a house designed for generosity. Tomorrow, he would continue exploring the passages and hidden rooms, learning more about the Wickham legacy. Tonight, he would study the financial documents Cordelia had left him, beginning to understand the true scope of the trust he'd been asked to protect. Morrison Development Group would have to find another property for their golf course. Wickham Manor had work to do. The trust document was hidden in the last place Raymond would have thought to look, inside the base of the grandfather clock that dominated the Manor's main hallway. He discovered it by accident while investigating why the clock had stopped working, finding that the pendulum compartment concealed a waterproof container holding the most important papers of Cordelia's life. The Wickham Family Charitable Trust, established in 1892, was worth far more than Raymond had imagined. Conservative investments, careful management, and decades of compound growth had created a foundation worth $133 million, just as Cordelia's letter had promised. But the document revealed complexities that took Raymond's breath away. The trust wasn't just about money, it was about responsibility. The heir who activated it would become the sole trustee, responsible for continuing the family's mission of anonymous charity. But more than that, they would become the guardian of a network that extended far beyond Millbrook, touching communities throughout New England, where the Wickhams had quietly intervened to prevent foreclosures, fund medical treatments, and support families through impossible times. The financial statements attached to the trust documents showed the scope of operations: 2.3 million distributed annually, reaching over 500 families, all managed through intermediaries and front organizations that prevented recipients from ever knowing the source of their aid. The Wickhams hadn't just been rich people who gave to charity, they had created a shadow welfare system that operated parallel to government programs, filling gaps and preventing crises before they destroyed lives. But there was a catch that made Raymond's hands shake as he read. The trust could only be activated by someone who proved themselves worthy through personal sacrifice, someone who demonstrated they would put the needs of others before their own comfort. The 90-day residency requirement was just the beginning. The real test would come when Raymond was asked to give up something precious for the sake of people he'd never met. As if summoned by his thoughts, his phone rang. Michael's name on the screen brought a mixture of relief and apprehension. "Dad, I'm coming to see you." "Michael, you don't need to." "Yes, I do. I've been thinking about what you're doing up there, and I realized I've been as bad as everyone else. Writing you off, assuming you couldn't handle this." Michael's voice carried an emotion Raymond hadn't heard since Martha's funeral. "Mum always said you were the strongest person she knew. Maybe it's time I started believing that again." The next morning, Raymond watched from the Manor's front steps as Michael's pickup truck navigated the winding drive. His son looked older than his 34 years, weathered by his work as a carpenter and the stress of trying to support his own family while worrying about his father's decline. But his handshake was firm, his smile genuine. "Jesus, Dad, this place is massive. Wait until you see the inside." Raymond took Michael through the Manor room by room, sharing what he'd learned about the Wickham family's charitable work, showing him the hidden passages and secret rooms that had facilitated a century of quiet generosity. Michael's carpenter's eye caught details Raymond had missed: original craftsmanship that spoke of master builders, structural elements that proved the house's fundamental soundness, restoration possibilities that wouldn't require the millions Morrison had claimed. "This could be beautiful again," Michael said, running his hand along a carved banister in the main hallway. "It would take work, yeah, but it's not hopeless, not even close." "You really think so?" "Dad, I've worked on Victorian houses before. Most of them were built by people who knew what they were doing, who used materials that were meant to last. This place has good bones." Michael paused in the doorway of the library, taking in the floor-to-ceiling shelves and massive fireplace. "The question is whether you want to put in the work to bring it back." That afternoon, while Michael examined the Manor's structural elements with professional thoroughness, Raymond received an unexpected visitor. Helen Patterson returned, but this time she wasn't alone. She brought with her a man in his 60s, well-dressed, but with the kind of weathered hands that spoke of honest work. "Raymond, I'd like you to meet Tom Rodriguez. His family received help from Cordelia for over 20 years. Tom shook Raymond's hand with the grip of someone accustomed to expressing himself through action rather than words. "Mrs. Patterson told me you might be continuing Mrs. Wickham's work. I wanted to thank you in person. I haven't done anything yet." "Maybe not, but you're trying. That's more than anyone else has done." Tom's voice carried the weight of deep gratitude. "Cordelia saved my family when my son got sick. Leukemia, when he was 12. Insurance wouldn't cover the experimental treatment he needed. We were facing bankruptcy, maybe losing him." "What happened?" "Someone anonymous paid for everything. The treatment, the travel costs, even our mortgage payments while I took time off work to be with Tommy in the hospital." Tom's eyes grew bright with unshed tears. "My son is 32 now, has kids of his own. All because a woman I never met decided his life was worth saving." Helen stepped forward, her own eyes misty. "There are dozens of stories like Tom's, families who don't even know they were helped by the Wickhams. Cordelia kept it all secret, but some of us figured it out over the years. And now she's asked you to carry it forward." Tom added, "Helen says you're not sure if you're the right person for the job. I'm here to tell you that anyone Cordelia chose has already proven themselves worthy." After Helen and Tom left, Raymond found Michael in the kitchen, examining the old appliances with the critical eye of someone who understood mechanical systems. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Are you doing this for the right reasons?" Raymond was quiet for a moment, considering the question. "What do you think the right reasons would be?" "Not to prove something to Grandma Margaret. Not to show Sarah and me that we were wrong about you. Not even to honor Mom's memory, though I know that's part of it." Michael turned to face his father directly. "The right reason would be because you believe this work is important, because you want to help people who need it. And if I'm not sure I believe in myself enough to help anyone, then maybe helping other people is how you learn to believe in yourself again." That evening, Michael helped Raymond prepare dinner in the caretaker's apartment, the first time they'd cooked together since Michael was a teenager, helping with weekend breakfasts. The conversation was easy, natural, touching on memories of Martha, hopes for the future, fears about whether Raymond was making the right choice. "The development company offered me $5 million, Raymond said as they sat down to eat. Michael set down his fork. $5 million? Cash, no contingencies. I could walk away tomorrow and never have to worry about money again. But you're not going to." "I don't think so. But I wanted you to know what I was turning down." Michael was quiet for a long time, processing the magnitude of the decision his father was making. "Dad, $5 million would solve a lot of problems. For you, for Sarah and me, for our kids someday. Yes, it would. But it would also mean the end of everything this place represents, the end of help for families like Tom Rodriguez's, the end of a system that's been saving lives for over a century." Raymond nodded, grateful that his son understood the true scope of the choice. "Then you're making the right decision," Michael said simply. "Mom would be proud." That night, as Michael slept in one of the Manor's renovated guest rooms, Raymond sat in Cordelia's hidden office, reading through more of the trust documents by lamplight. The papers revealed the careful thought that had gone into creating a sustainable system of charity, the legal protections that ensured the work could continue regardless of who served as trustee, the safeguards that prevented abuse or mismanagement of the funds. But they also revealed the personal cost of the work. Cordelia's private notes spoke of the loneliness that came with anonymous giving, the isolation of being unable to share the satisfaction of helping others, the burden of knowing about so much need in the world while being able to address only a fraction of it. The work is its own reward, she had written in one margin note, but it's also its own sacrifice. The trustee must be prepared to live quietly, to find satisfaction in results rather than recognition, to measure success by lives changed rather than thanks received. Raymond thought about his old life, the recognition he'd received at work, the respect of his neighbors, the simple pleasure of being known as a good husband and father. All of that would be different now. If he succeeded in becoming the trust's new guardian, he would return to a kind of invisibility, working behind the scenes to help people who would never know his name. But perhaps that was exactly what he needed, a purpose larger than his own grief, a mission that would require him to focus on others' needs rather than his own losses. For 2 years, he'd been trapped in the story of everything he'd lost. Maybe it was time to start writing the story of what he could give. Cordelia's journal was hidden in the one place Raymond had avoided, exploring Martha's old sewing room in the caretaker's apartment. He'd been using the space as storage, piling boxes against the built-in cabinets without really examining them. It wasn't until Michael pointed out that one of the cabinets appeared to have a false back that Raymond discovered the narrow space behind it, containing a leather journal that would change everything he thought he knew about his inheritance. The journal's first entry was dated 5 years before Martha's death, and it began with words that stopped Raymond's heart. "Today I received Martha Hale's first letter. She writes beautifully about her husband Raymond, about his character and devotion, about her fears for what will happen to him if something happens to her." Raymond sank into the apartment's small armchair, his hands trembling as he turned the pages. Cordelia's journal revealed a correspondence that had lasted 3 years, dozens of letters between 2 women who had never met but who shared a deep concern for Raymond's future. Martha's letters, as described by Cordelia, painted a picture of a wife who knew she was dying and was desperately trying to arrange for her husband's salvation. She had researched her family genealogy, discovered her connection to Cordelia Wickham, and reached out with a proposal that was both heartbreaking and brilliant. "Martha has asked me to watch over Raymond after she's gone," Cordelia had written. "Not in the way a charity case might be watched over, but in the way a person of value might be given an opportunity to discover their true worth. She believes, and I am beginning to agree, that Raymond is exactly the kind of person the trust needs, someone who understands sacrifice and puts love before personal gain." The journal entries chronicled Martha's decline and Cordelia's growing conviction that Raymond was the right choice for trustee. But they also revealed something that shook Raymond to his core. Martha had been directly involved in planning the inheritance. The conditions, the timing, even the specific challenges Raymond would face, all of it, had been designed collaboratively by 2 women who understood him better than he understood himself. "Martha insists that Raymond must not know about our correspondence," one entry read. "She says his pride would never allow him to accept help that he knew she had arranged. But she also knows that without some kind of intervention, his grief will destroy him. The inheritance must feel like a chance occurrence, not a carefully orchestrated rescue." Raymond closed the journal, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what Martha had done. Even while dying, even while fighting her own impossible battle, she had been planning for his future, arranging for his redemption, ensuring that he would have a reason to keep living after she was gone. His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. Sarah's name on the screen felt like a lifeline back to the present moment. "Dad, I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, about the development company's offer." "Sarah." "No, let me finish. I was wrong to push you toward taking the money. I was thinking like Grandma Margaret, focusing on security and practicality instead of what might actually make you happy." Her voice carried a note of discovery, as if she was working through something in real time. Mom used to say that you were the most generous person she knew, that you'd give away your last dollar if someone needed it more than you did. Your mother was biased. Maybe, but she was also right about most things. Sarah paused. Dad, what if this inheritance isn't about the money at all? What if it's about giving you a chance to be the person Mom always knew you were? After the call ended, Raymond returned to Cordelia's journal, finding entries that grew increasingly detailed as Martha's condition worsened. The two women had discussed not just the inheritance, but Raymond's personality, his strengths and weaknesses, his likely reactions to different scenarios. Martha worries that Raymond will see the trust's work as too big for him, that he'll doubt his ability to manage such responsibility, one entry noted. I have assured her that the best trustees are often those who approach the work with humility rather than confidence. Arrogance is the enemy of good charity. It leads to helping people in ways that serve the giver's ego rather than the recipient's actual needs. But the most revealing entries came from Martha's final months, when she was working with Cordelia to ensure every detail of the inheritance would unfold perfectly. Martha has asked me to promise that if Raymond seems to be failing the test, I will find a way to guide him without revealing the truth about our planning. Cordelia had written. She fears that learning about her involvement might make him feel manipulated rather than loved. I have agreed, though I hope such guidance won't be necessary. From Martha's descriptions, Raymond sounds like exactly the kind of man who will rise to meet a worthy challenge. The journal's final entries were written after Martha's death, describing Cordelia's private investigation into Raymond's character, her growing certainty that Martha had chosen well, and her own excitement about the prospect of finally meeting the man Martha had described with such obvious love. I had my investigator follow Raymond for 6 months after Martha's funeral, one entry read. The report confirms everything Martha told me. Even in his darkest moments, even when he lost the house and the job, Raymond never became bitter or cruel. He simply became lost. The inheritance will give him a chance to find himself again, to discover that his capacity for love didn't die with Marthate, simply needs a new direction. Raymond set the journal aside and walked to the window, looking out over the manor's grounds as the late afternoon sun slanted through the ancient oaks. Everything he had experienced since arriving here, the mysterious letter, the perfect timing, even his growing connection to Cordelia's mission, had been orchestrated by Martha as her final gift to him. But rather than feeling manipulated, Raymond felt overwhelmed by the depth of Martha's love. She had known him well enough to understand that he would need a purpose larger than his own grief to survive her loss. She had arranged for him to inherit not just money or property, but a mission that would require him to be the best version of himself. The journal contained one final revelation that brought tears to Raymond's eyes. In Cordelia's last entry, written just days before her death, she had described a dream that felt more like a visitation. Martha came to me in my sleep last night. She thanked me for agreeing to help Raymond, and she told me something I found both beautiful and heartbreaking. She said that Raymond's greatest fear wasn't poverty or loneliness, it was the possibility that his life might not matter, that his capacity for love might go unused. The trust will show him that every life he touches matters, that love multiplied through service becomes something larger than either the giver or the receiver. That evening, Michael found Raymond sitting in the manor's library, surrounded by Cordelia's papers and Martha's revealed love. "You look like someone who's seen a ghost," Michael said, settling into the chair across from his father. "In a way, I have." Raymond told Michael about the journal, about Martha's secret correspondence with Cordelia, about the elaborate plan 2 dying women had crafted to save him from despair. Michael listened without interrupting, his expression moving from surprise to wonder to something approaching awe. "Mom planned all this?" "Every detail. The timing, the conditions, even the specific challenges I'd face. She knew me well enough to understand exactly what I'd need to find my way back to living, instead of just existing." "And you're okay with that? Knowing that it wasn't really random?" Raymond considered the question carefully. "I think I'm more than okay with it. I think I'm grateful beyond words that someone loved me enough to arrange for my redemption." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, father and son processing the magnitude of Martha's final act of love. Outside, the March evening was giving way to night, and the manor's windows glowed warmly in the darkness. "So what happens now?" Michael asked finally. "Now I stop worrying about whether I'm worthy of Cordelia's trust," Raymond said, "and start focusing on being worthy of Martha's faith in me." The plot twist had revealed the inheritance's true nature, not a random stroke of luck, but a carefully planned intervention designed by the person who had known and loved Raymond best. Martha had arranged for him to inherit not just the means to help others, but the opportunity to discover that his own life still had meaning and purpose. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight Raymond felt something he hadn't experienced since Martha's death, the certainty that he was exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. Martha's final gift wasn't just the inheritance, it was the knowledge that even in death, her love continued to guide him toward becoming the man she'd always believed him to be. Martha's secret letters were discovered in the most intimate hiding place of all, tucked inside the pages of the Bible that had sat on Cordelia's nightstand. Raymond found them while helping Michael inventory the manor's contents, each letter carefully preserved between tissue paper, arranged in chronological order to tell the story of two women planning a miracle. The letters revealed Martha's voice in a way that broke Raymond's heart and rebuilt it simultaneously. Her handwriting, growing shakier as her illness progressed, carried the tone of someone who was dying but refused to despair because she was too busy arranging for love to continue after her death. "Dear Cordelia," the first letter began, "I am writing to you as a stranger who shares your family name and your commitment to helping others. My husband Raymond doesn't know I'm reaching out, and he cannot know until it's too late for his pride to interfere. I am dying, and I need to ensure that the man I love most in the world has a reason to keep living when I'm gone." Raymond read the letters aloud to Michael as they sat in Cordelia's bedroom. Both men moved to tears by Martha's clear-eyed assessment of her husband's character and her desperate hope that Cordelia would agree to save him from himself. "Raymond is the most generous man I have ever known," one letter continued, "but he has never learned to be generous with himself. He will blame himself for my death, for not being able to afford better treatments, for not being strong enough to save me. Without intervention, that guilt will destroy him. But give him other people to save, other lives to improve, and he will remember why his own life has value." The correspondence revealed the careful psychology behind every aspect of the inheritance. The 90-day residency requirement wasn't arbitrariate, was the amount of time Martha estimated Raymond would need to work through his initial resistance and begin to see possibilities rather than obstacles. The hidden clues and secret rooms weren't just mysterious, they were designed to make Raymond feel like an explorer, uncovering treasures rather than a charity case, receiving handouts. The house must challenge him, Martha had written, but not overwhelm him. He must feel that he's earning the inheritance through his own efforts, discovering its purpose through his own intelligence and determination. Only then will he accept the responsibility without feeling diminished by it. But the letters also revealed something that made Raymond's chest tight with emotion, Martha's absolute faith in his ability to rise to the challenge. Even while dying, even while watching him struggle with despair and self-doubt, she had never wavered in her belief that he possessed the strength and character necessary to become the trust's guardian. "I know my Raymond," she had written in one of her final letters. "Others see a man who has been broken by circumstances, but I see a man who has been refined by love. Every sacrifice he made for me, every sleepless night he spent caring for me, every dollar he spent trying to save Manor of it was wasted. It was preparation for becoming the kind of person who can carry forward the Wickham legacy." While Raymond absorbed the full magnitude of Martha's love and planning, the outside world was closing in on Wickham Manor. Morrison Development Group had escalated their pressure, sending surveyors to examine the property boundaries, filing permits for exploratory assessments, and spreading rumors in town about the manor's structural instability. More concerning were the signs that someone had been inside the house. Raymond and Michael discovered evidence of recent intrusions, doors that had been unlocked and relocked, papers that had been moved and replaced, even fresh footprints in some of the secret passages. Someone with knowledge of the manor's hidden spaces was conducting their own search, looking for something specific. The answer came when Tom Rodriguez called with disturbing news. "Raymond, I think you should know someone's been asking questions about you in town. Professional-looking guy, claiming to be a journalist writing about historic properties. But the questions weren't about architecture. He was asking about Mrs. Wickham's charity work, about whether anyone knew if she'd left behind records or documents." "What did you tell him?" "Nothing, because I don't trust him, but others might not be so careful. Word's getting around that you've inherited more than just a house, and that's making some people very interested in what you might have found." That evening, while Michael worked on securing the manor's entrances, Raymond called James Hartwell for legal advice. The attorney's voice was grave when he heard about the development company's escalating pressure and the mysterious inquiries about Cordelia's papers. "Mr. Hale, I think it's time you understood something about Mrs. Wickham's will that I was instructed not to reveal unless circumstances required it. There are people who have been waiting for her to die, people who suspected she was hiding significant assets. Your presence at the manor has confirmed their suspicions." "What kind of people?" "The kind who make their living identifying and exploiting vulnerable estates. They know you're not wealthy, they know you're grieving, and they're betting you'll eventually accept their offer rather than fight a prolonged battle over the inheritance." Hartwell explained that Morrison Development was likely a front for a larger consortium of investors who specialized in acquiring historic properties through a combination of legitimate offers and applied pressure. They would use building inspectors, zoning challenges, tax assessments, and other bureaucratic weapons to make ownership so difficult that most inheritors eventually sold just to escape the harassment. "The good news," Hartwell continued, "is that Mrs. Wickham anticipated exactly this scenario. She built legal protections into the trust that will activate once you successfully complete the inheritance conditions. But until then, you're vulnerable." "How vulnerable?" "They can't force you to sell, but they can make your life very difficult. The question is whether you're prepared to fight them for as long as it takes." Raymond looked around the caretaker's apartment, at Martha's letters spread across the small table, at the evidence of two women's careful planning for this exact moment. "I'm prepared." The next morning brought the most serious escalation yet. Raymond woke to find official notices posted on the manor's front gate. Building code violations, environmental impact assessments, historical preservation reviews. Each notice carried the threat of fines, work stoppages, or forced evacuations if not addressed within impossibly short time frames. Michael studied the notices with the professional eye of someone who dealt with building bureaucracy before. "Dad, these are harassment tactics. Half of these violations don't even apply to residential properties, and the other half are for problems that have existed for years without anyone caring. Can we fight them?" "We can, but it'll be expensive and time-consuming." "Which is exactly what they want to drain your resources and patience until selling seems like the only reasonable option." That afternoon, Raymond received an unexpected ally. Helen Patterson arrived with a small convoy of neighbors: Tom Rodriguez, the waitress from May's Diner, the building inspector who had declared the house structurally sound, and a half-dozen others who had been helped by Cordelia's charity over the years. "We heard about the trouble you're having," Helen said, gesturing toward the official notices. "We wanted you to know that you're not fighting this alone." Tom stepped forward, carrying a folder thick with documents. "We've been documenting Morrison Development's tactics. This isn't the first historic property they've targeted, and it won't be the last. But we've found records of their previous acquisitions, evidence of the same harassment patterns they're using against you." The building inspector, whose name was Frank Morisano, relation to the development company, despite the shared surname, was particularly helpful. "These violations are bogus," he said bluntly. "I've already filed a report stating that the property meets all safety requirements for residential occupancy." Someone's using their connections to generate paperwork designed to intimidate you. As the group gathered in the Manor's library, sharing information and planning strategy, Raymond felt something he hadn't experienced since Martha's death: the support of a community that had adopted him as one of their own. These people barely knew him, but they understood what he represented: the continuation of Cordelia's work, the preservation of a legacy that had touched all their lives. "Mrs. Wickham helped my family for 30 years, said the waitress from Mays, whose name was actually Dorothy. "Never asked for thanks, never wanted recognition. Just quiet help when we needed it most. If she chose you to carry on that work, then we're going to make sure you get the chance to do it." The meeting broke up with assignments. Tom would continue documenting Morrison Development's activities. Frank would challenge the building violations through proper channels. Helen would coordinate community support, and Dorothy would keep track of any strangers asking questions in town. That night, as Raymond and Michael prepared for what felt like an impending siege, Raymond realized that Martha's letters had revealed something beyond her careful planning. They had shown him that love doesn't end with death. It transforms into legacy, into community, into the kind of support that surrounds someone when they're fighting for something larger than themselves. "Dad," Michael said, as they secured the last of the Manor's vulnerable windows, "are you sure you're ready for this fight? It's going to get worse before it gets better." Raymond looked around the library, at the evidence of the Wickham family's century-long commitment to helping others, at Martha's letters promising that he had the strength to carry forward their work, at the trust documents that would allow him to continue touching lives in ways he was only beginning to understand. "I'm ready," he said, and for the first time since Martha's death, he meant it completely. The climax was coming, the final test of whether a broken widower could become the guardian of a legacy built on love and sustained by sacrifice. But he wouldn't face it alone. Martha's planning had ensured that too. The golden compass was the final piece of Cordelia's elaborate puzzle, hidden exactly where Martha's letters had suggested it would be, inside the base of the Manor's weather vane, accessible only through a narrow window in the tower's highest room. Raymond found it on his 87th day of residency, with just 3 days remaining to fulfill the inheritance conditions. The compass was a masterpiece of 19th-century craftsmanship, its brass case engraved with the Wickham family crest and inscribed with words that made Raymond's breath catch. "Love's true direction never changes." But this wasn't a navigation instrument in any conventional sense. Instead of pointing north, the needle pointed toward magnetic anomalies hidden throughout the Manor locations where Cordelia had concealed the final elements necessary to activate the trust. Michael helped Raymond decipher the compass's function, noting how the needles swung toward different directions as they moved through the house. "It's like a treasure hunt," he said, "but the treasure is the key to unlocking your inheritance." The compass led them first to the kitchen's root cellar, where behind a wall of preserved goods they found a steel strongbox containing the trust's activation codes, numbers and passwords that would allow Raymond to access the charitable foundation's accounts and begin distributing aid to families in need. From there, the compass directed them to the Manor's original master bedroom, where beneath a loose floorboard lay a leather portfolio filled with current case files. Cordelia had been maintaining detailed records of families throughout New England who needed help, but were too proud to ask for it: single mothers struggling with medical bills, elderly couples facing foreclosure, children whose parents couldn't afford school supplies or college tuition. "Look at this," Michael said, studying one of the files. "She's got everything: financial records, family situations, even psychological profiles about the best ways to help without damaging people's dignity. This isn't just charity, it's a science." But the compass's final destination was the most important. It led them to a room Raymond had never seen before, concealed behind a bookshelf in Cordelia's private study. The hidden chamber contained what could only be described as a command center for the charitable trust, filing cabinets full of case histories, communication equipment for coordinating with intermediaries, and a wall-mounted map showing the geographic scope of the Wickham family's influence. At the center of the room sat an antique desk, and on that desk was an envelope marked, "For Raymond to be opened when the compass brings you home." Inside the envelope was Cordelia's final letter, written in her distinctive handwriting, but with the shaky quality that indicated her failing health. "My dear Raymond, if you are reading this, you have proven yourself worthy in every way that matters. You have lived in this house for nearly 3 months, discovered its secrets, understood its purpose, and most importantly, chosen to stay despite the pressure to leave. Martha was right about you. You are exactly the kind of man the trust needs. But now comes the final test, and it is not one I or Martha could prepare you for. Tomorrow, Morrison Development will make their final offer. They will present you with evidence of legal challenges that could drag on for years, costing you money you don't have and time you cannot spare. They will offer you a settlement that seems generous, but comes with conditions that would destroy everything the trust represents. You must choose between security and service, between personal comfort and continuing our work. Martha believed you would choose service, as she did when she spent her final months planning for your inheritance, rather than focusing on her own comfort. I believe she was right, but the choice must be yours alone. The letter concluded with instructions for activating the trust, along with a warning that once activated, the inheritance could never be sold or transferred to anyone outside the Wickham family line, which now included Raymond through marriage. As if summoned by their discovery, Raymond's phone rang. James Hartwell's voice was tense with urgency. "Mr. Hale, Morrison Development has filed for an emergency court hearing tomorrow morning. They're claiming that your occupancy of the manor violates several county ordinances and that the property should be placed in receivership pending resolution of the building code violations." "Can they do that?" "They can try. I've prepared counter-arguments, but you need to understand what you're facing. This hearing will determine whether you maintain control of the property long enough to complete the inheritance conditions. If the court rules against you, even temporarily, the 90-day requirement becomes impossible to fulfill." Raymond looked around the command center, at the evidence of generations of careful charity, at the files documenting families who needed help that only the trust could provide. "What do I need to do?" "Be prepared to defend your decision to stay, and be prepared for Morrison to make their most attractive offer yet. They'll present it as a reasonable compromise that serves everyone's interests." That evening, as Raymond and Michael prepared for the court hearing, unexpected support arrived. Sarah called to say she was driving up from Connecticut to be there for the hearing, bringing with her a folder of research she'd conducted on Morrison Development's business practices. "Dad, I'm sorry it took me so long to understand what you're really doing up there. But I've been researching this development company, and they're not the legitimate business they pretend to be. They specialize in acquiring historic properties through intimidation, then demolishing them for projects that never quite materialize as promised." More support came from the community Cordelia had quietly served for decades. Tom Rodriguez organized a group of neighbors to attend the court hearing, each prepared to testify about Raymond's character and the manor's importance to the area's history. Helen Patterson contacted local historical societies, generating media interest in the case as a battle between preservation and development. Even Dorothy from May's Diner contributed by tracking down records of Morrison Development's previous acquisitions, revealing a pattern of properties that had been purchased with promises of tasteful development, but ended up as abandoned lots or poorly planned subdivisions. But the most significant support came from an unexpected source. Margaret called that evening, her voice lacking its usual edge of criticism. "Raymond, Sarah told me what's really happening up there, about the charitable trust, about Martha's involvement in planning your inheritance, about the legal battle you're facing. I know you think I'm making a mistake. Actually, I think I'm the one who made a mistake. I've been so focused on practical concerns, your financial security, your living situation, that I forgot to consider what would actually make you happy." Margaret paused, and when she continued, her voice was softer than Raymond had ever heard it. "Martha always said you were the most generous man she knew, Maybe it's time you had the resources to match your heart. The night before the court hearing, Raymond stood in the command center, surrounded by evidence of the trust's scope and importance. The golden compass sat on the desk beside activation codes that would unlock $133 million for charitable use. Tomorrow, he would face the choice Cordelia had warned him about: security or service, personal comfort or continuing the work that had defined the Wickham family for over a century. But as he held Martha's final letter, reading her words of faith in his character and her certainty that he would choose love over fear, Raymond realized the choice had already been made. It had been made the moment he decided to stay in the Manor despite the pressure to leave, the moment he chose to explore its secrets instead of accepting defeat, the moment he understood that some things were worth fighting for, even when the odds seemed impossible. The climax was here, the final test of everything Martha and Cordelia had believed about him. Tomorrow would determine whether a broken widower could become the guardian of a legacy built on love, sacrifice, and the quiet revolution of helping others without expecting recognition in return. The Foundation Charter was the document Raymond had been searching for without knowing it, the legal instrument that would transform Wickham Manor from a private residence into a charitable foundation, ensuring its protection from development while allowing the trust's work to continue in perpetuity. The court hearing began at 9 in the morning in a small courtroom that felt too ordinary for the magnitude of what was being decided. Judge Patricia Coleman presided with the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who had seen every variety of legal maneuvering and wasn't impressed by any of it. Morrison Development came prepared for war. Their lead attorney presented a thick folder of documentation, building code violations, environmental concerns, neighbor complaints, safety assessments. They painted Raymond as a stubborn old man, endangering himself and others by living in a structurally unsound building that should be condemned. "Your Honor," the attorney argued, "Mr. Hale is a grieving widower who has made an emotional decision that puts him at serious risk. The responsible action is to place the property in receivership until proper safety evaluations can be completed." But James Hartwell was equally prepared. He presented Frank Morrison's official building inspection report, documentation of the harassment campaign against Raymond, and most importantly, evidence of the development company's pattern of acquiring historic properties under false pretenses. "Your Honor, this is not about building safety. This is about a development company trying to circumvent normal acquisition procedures by manufacturing a crisis that doesn't exist." The turning point came when Tom Rodriguez was called to testify. His voice carried the weight of lived experience as he described Cordelia's decades of quiet charity and Raymond's growing understanding of the trust's mission. "Mrs. Wickham saved my son's life by paying for cancer treatment we couldn't afford. She helped dozens of families in this community without ever asking for recognition. Mr. Hale isn't just inheriting a house, he's inheriting a responsibility to continue that work." Sarah testified next, presenting her research on Morrison Development's business practices with the clarity of someone who had done her homework thoroughly. She documented properties that had been acquired with promises of tasteful development, but ended up demolished for projects that were never completed. "Your Honor, my father isn't the stubborn old man they're portraying. He's a man who has found a purpose worth fighting for. The question isn't whether he's capable of maintaining the property, it's whether we're going to allow legitimate charitable work to be destroyed for the sake of speculative development." Judge Coleman listened to all the testimony with the patience of someone accustomed to separating truth from legal theater. When the arguments concluded, she called for a brief recess before rendering her decision. During the break, Morrison Development's attorney approached Raymond with what appeared to be their final offer. "Mr. Hale, my clients are prepared to make this simple for you. $7 million, cash, closing within 2 weeks. All legal challenges dropped, all harassment stopped. You walk away with more money than you could spend in 3 lifetimes. And the manor will be developed respectfully, with historical elements preserved where possible." Raymond looked at the attorney, at Morrison and his associate Turner sitting at the defense table, at the stack of legal documents that represented months of pressure designed to wear him into submission. "No," he said simply. "Mr. Hale, be reasonable. You're one man trying to maintain a property that would challenge an entire organization. Even if you win today, they'll find other ways to make this difficult for you. Then I'll deal with those challenges when they come." When court reconvened, Judge Coleman's decision was both swift and decisive. After reviewing all evidence and testimony, this court finds that the building code violations cited by Morrison Development either do not apply to residential occupancy or have been addressed by proper safety inspections. The motion for receivership is denied. She continued with words that felt like vindication. Furthermore, this court notes with concern the pattern of harassment documented by the defense. Morrison Development is hereby enjoined from any further attempts to interfere with Mr. Hale's lawful occupancy of the property. The courtroom erupted in quiet celebration from Raymond's supporters, but Judge Coleman wasn't finished. "Mr. Hale, you have 3 days remaining to fulfill the conditions of your inheritance. This court hopes you succeed, as the charitable work described in testimony serves important community needs." Outside the courthouse, Raymond was surrounded by supporters who had become friends, neighbors who had become family. Helen Patterson hugged him with tears in her eyes. Tom Rodriguez shook his hand with the firm grip of someone who understood the significance of what had just been preserved. But it was Sarah's embrace that meant the most. "Dad, I'm proud of you. Mom would be proud too." "I hope so, sweetheart." "I know so. She arranged all this because she believed in you. The least we can do is believe in you too." That afternoon, back at Wickham Manor, Raymond gathered with Michael and Sarah in the command center to complete the inheritance process. Using the codes from the Golden Compass, he accessed the trust's accounts for the first time, seeing the actual scope of the charitable foundation he was about to control. The numbers were staggering. 133 million in carefully invested assets, generating over 5 million annually in sustainable income for charitable distribution. But more important than the money were the system's already in place networks of intermediaries, carefully researched family profiles, protocols for anonymous giving that protected recipients' dignity while providing maximum help. "Dad," Michael said, studying the files, "this isn't just inheritance, this is a calling." Raymond looked at the foundation charter Cordelia had prepared, the legal document that would transform Wickham Manor into the headquarters of a charitable foundation while ensuring he could live there as its director. All it required was his signature and filing with the appropriate authorities. But before he signed, he opened Martha's final letter one more time, reading her words of faith and love, her certainty that he possessed the character necessary to carry forward the Wickham legacy. "My beloved Raymond," the letter concluded, "I know you will choose service over security, love over fear, giving over receiving. Not because you are perfect, but because you understand that broken things can be made whole through the act of healing others. Sign the charter, activate the trust, become the man I always knew you were." Raymond signed the foundation charter with a steady hand, officially transforming himself from a broke widower into the director of one of New England's most significant charitable foundations. Michael witnessed the signature, Sarah photographed the moment for posterity, and James Hartwell filed the paperwork that would make it legally binding. As the sun set on his 89th day at Wickham Manor, Raymond stood in the grand foyer where his journey had begun, surrounded by his children and friends, holding the activated trust documents that would allow him to help hundreds of families without them ever knowing his name. The climax was complete. The broken man who had arrived 3 months ago had been transformed into the guardian of a legacy built on love and sustained by sacrifice. Martha's faith had been vindicated, Cordelia's trust had been justified, and Raymond Hale had discovered that his life was far from over, it was just beginning. 6 months after activating the Wickham Foundation, Raymond stood in the Manor's fully restored library, watching his granddaughter Emma take her first steps across the Persian rug that had been cleaned and returned to its original glory. The house hummed with life in ways it hadn't known for decades, not just Raymond's presence, but the constant stream of foundation, staff, community members, and families whose lives had been quietly transformed by the Trust's work. The new family portrait would be taken in an hour, but Raymond allowed himself this moment of quiet reflection first. Through the tall windows, he could see the gardens that Michael had restored with the help of local landscapers, the front drive that had been repaved and lined with period-appropriate lighting, the stone facade that had been cleaned and repointed to reveal the manor's original grandeur. But the real transformation wasn't in the building, it was in the man who had found his purpose within its walls. "Grandpa Ray, look," Emma called out, tottering toward him with the determined concentration of a 15-month-old who had recently discovered the joy of independent movement. Raymond scooped her up, marveling at how naturally the role of grandfather had settled around him. Sarah's decision to move closer to Millbrook so Emma could grow up, knowing her grandfather, had been one of many unexpected gifts that had emerged from his choice to stay and fight for the manor. "The photographer's here," Sarah announced from the doorway, but she paused to watch her father with her daughter, noting the peace that had settled into his features over the past months. The haggard desperation that had defined him during the worst of his grief had been replaced by something calmer, but no less determined, the quiet satisfaction of a man who had found meaningful work. The portrait session took place in the morning room, where the boarded windows had been replaced with restored stained glass that threw rainbow patterns across the walls. The photographer, a local woman who specialized in family portraits, arranged them carefully. Raymond in the center, holding Emma, Sarah and Michael flanking him. Helen Patterson and Tom Rodriguez included as the chosen family that had supported him through his darkest and brightest moments. But the most significant addition to the portrait was the empty chair positioned slightly apart from the group Martha's chair, placed there not as a symbol of absence, but as an acknowledgement of presence. Her planning, her love, her faith in Raymond's character had made everything possible. She deserved to be part of the celebration, even in spirit. "Tell me again about the Miller family," Sarah said as they waited for the photographer to adjust her lighting. Raymond smiled, still amazed by how naturally he'd settled into the role of anonymous benefactor. 3 kids, single mother, working 2 jobs, facing eviction because her ex-husband stopped paying child support. "We arranged for the landlord to receive an anonymous payment covering 6 months' rent, then helped her find better-paying work through our employment network. She has no idea where the help came from." "And that doesn't bother you, not getting credit?" "It's better this way. If she knew someone was helping her, she'd feel obligated, maybe even ashamed. This way, she can believe she's handling her problems herself, which preserves her dignity while still getting her the help she needs." The photographer captured dozens of images, but the one that would become the family's favorite showed Raymond mid-laugh, responding to something Michael had said about his latest restoration project on the manor's carriage house. In that moment, caught by chance and preserved forever, Raymond looked like what he had become, a man who had found his way back to joy through the act of serving others. After the photography session, Raymond walked through the manor's rooms, noting the changes that 6 months of proper care and adequate funding had wrought. The damaged plaster had been repaired and painted. The broken windows had been replaced with historically accurate glass. The sagging floors had been reinforced and refinished. Even the tower room, where he'd found the golden compass, had been converted into a private office where he could work on foundation business while enjoying views of the restored gardens. But the most important restoration had been the activation of the manor's original purpose. The hidden rooms now served their intended function as meeting spaces for families who needed help but wanted privacy. The secret passages allowed foundation staff to move discreetly through the building. The command center had been updated with modern communication equipment that allowed Raymond to coordinate with charitable networks throughout New England. The foundation's work had expanded beyond even Cordelia's ambitions. In 6 months, they had prevented dozens of foreclosures, funded medical treatments for families facing bankruptcy, provided college scholarships for deserving students, and created an emergency fund that local hospitals and schools could access for families in crisis. All of it done anonymously, through intermediaries, with careful attention to preserving recipients' dignity while providing maximum help. Margaret had visited the previous month, her first trip to the manor since Raymond had inherited it. She'd arrived expecting to find her son-in-law playing at being a philanthropist with money he hadn't earned. Instead, she'd discovered a sophisticated charitable operation that was making real differences in real lives, managed by a man who had found his calling in service to others. "I owe you an apology," she'd said during that visit, standing in the same morning room where the family portrait had been taken. "I thought you were running away from reality. I didn't understand that you were running toward purpose." "You were protecting your daughter's memory," Raymond had replied. "Martha would have appreciated that, even if she would have disagreed with your methods. She would have been proud of what you've built here. She built it. I'm just the caretaker." As evening approached, Raymond made his way to Cordelia's restored bedroom, now maintained as a memorial to the woman whose planning had made everything possible. Her personal effects remained exactly as she'd left them, but the room no longer felt frozen in time. Instead, it felt like a living tribute to someone whose work continued through Raymond's efforts. He opened Martha's final letter, reading it, as he did every night before bed. The paper was growing soft from handling, but the words remained as powerful as ever. "My beloved Raymond, I know you will choose service over security, love over fear, giving over receiving. Not because you are perfect, but because you understand that broken things can be made whole through the act of healing others." Outside, the October wind rustled through the ancient oaks that had witnessed the manor's construction, its abandonment, and now its resurrection, as something greater than its builders had ever imagined. Inside, Raymond prepared for sleep in the caretaker's apartment that had become his permanent home, surrounded by evidence of the new life he'd built from the ashes of his old one. The Wickham Foundation had received over 300 requests for help in its first 6 months of operation. They had approved assistance for 247 families, channeling over $2.8 million in aid through networks that ensured recipients never knew the source of their help. Children were staying in school, families were keeping their homes, medical treatments were being funded, dreams were being preserved, all because a broken widower had chosen to honor his wife's faith in his character. As Raymond turned off the light and settled into bed, he thought about the journey that had brought him to this moment. 6 months ago, he'd been a man who had lost everything and saw no reason to continue living. Tonight, he was the director of a charitable foundation that was changing lives throughout New England, surrounded by family and friends who respected the work he was doing, living in a restored mansion that had become the headquarters for a quiet revolution of kindness. Martha had been right, as she'd been right about so many things. Broken things could indeed be made whole through the act of healing others. The man who had arrived at Wickham Manor as a failure had been transformed into someone whose life mattered in ways he was only beginning to understand. The new family portrait would hang in the manor's main hallway, showing Raymond surrounded by the people who loved him, holding his granddaughter, who would grow up knowing that sometimes the greatest treasures are hidden in the most unexpected places, waiting for someone brave enough to believe that their best days might still be ahead of them. Raymond Hale had found his fortune, but more importantly, he had found himself. The inheritance had given him $133 million to help others, but Martha's love had given him something even more valuable: the knowledge that his life still had meaning, purpose, and the capacity to touch other lives in ways that would echo far beyond his own lifetime. Outside Wickham Manor, the world continued its usual mix of joy and sorrow, hope and despair. But inside the restored walls, a quiet revolution continued, one anonymous act of kindness at a time. One family helped without fanfare, one life improved without expectation of gratitude. It was exactly the kind of revolution Martha had known her husband was born to lead, if he could just find the courage to begin.